All right, welcome everybody once again to Ask Me Anything, the free-form Q&A with Santa Barbara Arts and Culture Figures. I'm Casey Caldwell, the Managing Director of the Arts Collaborative and Community Arts Workshop. This season of Ask Me Anything is generously sponsored by Sullivan Goss, an American gallery. Find out more about Sullivan Goss and see their current exhibitions at sullivangoss.com. Thank you so much to our sponsors and to our supporters. If you would like to support Ask Me Anything and the work of Santa Barbara Arts Collaborative, you can do so at sbca.org/AMA, and we would be incredibly grateful for the support. Our guest this week is Michael Morgan. Michael is a professor at the UCSB Department of Theater and Dance, is a classically trained actor and voice teacher who grew up in Harlem, New York. He founded the Odyssey Project in 2011 as a collaborative theater project with youth and juvenile detention using Homer's The Odyssey to engage with the stories of their own lives. Most recently, he directed The Trojan Women, an experimental arts activist project with incarcerated female youth in collaboration with the Youth Correctional Facility at UC Davis. And in 2018, he also directed The Going Home Project, which was a theater initiative with homeless youth that was part of the 2018 Arts Residency Program at the Community Arts Workshop. I've been looking forward to talking to Michael for a very long time, so I am really looking forward to this. I am just noticing, though, that we seem to be having a problem with the connection because we have lost Michael. I'm sorry, everybody. Let me see what I can do here. Well, hello, everybody. We are back. Michael's internet connection dropped off as this happens sometimes. So yeah, we're back and rolling now. Michael, if you are there and logged in, why don't you go ahead and turn your video and audio on? Hey.
Hello.
This is the first time this has happened on one of these shows. I never
had
somebody just completely lose their internet. Yeah, I'm actually surprised it's the first time.
I'm in a canyon. What can I say?
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm glad you got you back, and let's just roll right into it, since who knows, we might lose you again. I like to start pretty much all of these interviews in about the same way. And just so you know, I basically introduced you while your internet was off, so I've already told everybody about the Odyssey Project, and then I realized, oh, where'd Michael go? We're rolling right ahead here. So I start all these interviews with some kind of a question. I'm always curious what set people in the trajectory that they're on today. And more accurately, I guess, sort of the trajectory of interest that they're on today. Because there's so many factors in life that lead to the actual work that we do. But, the sort of particularities of someone's journey about how they got curious about the things that they're curious about today. So I'm wondering if there was a moment in your youth or childhood that you can point to of sort of a first curiosity about the things that you're curious about today. A moment of like, what is that? Look at that.
Well, you're right. There are lots of pieces and steps to get to that epiphany. I would have to say, probably when I was going to NYU Tisch studying acting, I went to see a document. It was actually not a documentary. It was a film called Nothing But a Man. And it was a complete slice of life kind of film about people who worked in the South in factories, and it was done so brilliantly and so beautifully in black and white that I thought it was a documentary. And of course, at that time, I was studying things like Shakespeare and the other classics and fell in love with those. And I always wanted to see if I could combine the two. And so my idea was to create what I would call the new classics. And that had to do with finding a way of using not only contemporary culture, but marginalized people to re-inhabit and to possibly, maybe even reinterpret, and also to revive the classics by using their stories and allowing their voices to come out. And I'm
not clear. How did that idea emerge from the film that you saw?
Well, the film was about basically poor people in the South who were Black and the kinds of oppressions that they were facing. And it was, first of all, it was a film that you didn't see every day. Most films are sort of like managed and driven by Hollywood. And they're driven in such a way that, sometimes currently, I suppose one can say there has been breakthroughs. But at that time, there really were not a lot. Um, so it really created a kind of different film. And I grew up in a very sort of, I guess, entertainment oriented family. Both my dad and my brother were jazz musicians. We had a baby grand, and I mean there was a whole lot of music and culture. And they took me to my family, my parents took me to films pretty much every week. And
Mm,
so I was immersed in the major culture of the time, the established culture. But I had never seen a film that was like this, that really broke with that tradition in such a startling way that I
mm,
couldn't even tell if it was a movie. I just thought I was looking at a documentary.
mm.
And it just made me feel like somehow, that's where I think I need to be. I need to live in that space. Um,
And how would you define that space?
Well, as I said, I think it was a kind of combination of that kind of beautiful art, which you have, from very professional artists, and you combine that with not only issues that were relevant to people who were oppressed, and not just people who were of a kind of upper class status or even middle class status, but people who are really dealing with survival issues, and a vision that their stories were equivalent to the stories of what I was reading in, all of my beautiful and great classical European centric
Mm,
literature. Um, so I think that sort of launched me. I was also in street theater when I was 19. And when I
mm,
was in street theater, that actually moved me around the country. It was actually a national tour. And as a result, I really played in the streets to different kinds of populations. And it was just one of the high points actually in my life. And I think it sort of stamped me and marked me as somebody who found that that was where I needed to live with the
mm,
people, basically.
mm, mm. You to sort of follow along with that, I saw written somewhere, maybe by you, maybe somebody writing about you, I can't remember. The quote was, "The Odyssey Project connects with Michael's origins growing up in Harlem, where he says he came to understand the survival choices that dominate the youth in tough neighborhoods. A lifelong actor and instructor, he discovered that facilitating someone to believe in their potential and shift their lives from destructive to productive has been his highest calling as a teacher." So can you speak a little bit to that, of sort of those origins in your youth in Harlem as well, and the stories that you saw, and how that connects to the work that you do today in correctional facilities with the Odyssey Project?
Well, I mean, the thing is that a lot of the work that I'm doing, I have to actually say that I believe I'm channeling my mother,
Mm,
and I'm channeling generations before me and ancestors before me who have struggled. I fortunately didn't come up in poverty. I wasn't super, super rich, but my parents really were exceptional. So they took the time to make sure that education was primary in my life. And in a way, they sheltered me. But we were still living in
mm,
Harlem. So I actually saw quite a lot of action. There's a lot of activity, and there's a lot of life and a lot of energy. And I don't want to malign Harlem. It was terrific. I mean, I grew up in one of the richest environments in the world, but there were
mm,
clearly problems and troubles. And um, so I guess what I learned early on is that the issues that surround us and the people who are struggling around us should not be left behind or placed in a kind of sort of peripheral vision, that they need to be included. So that became part of my upbringing. So it followed me, I think, through my work ethic.
mm, mm. So I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about the actual Odyssey project and the process that the project takes. I in reading and preparing for this, it seemed like there's sort of a series of steps that you developed. That you have folks do drawing and do maps of home, and they do self portraits that relate to a fatal flaw. They really sort of used this classic mythological structure as a way of exploring their own lives. So I'd be curious to hear you talk about that process and how you developed it and challenges thereof?
Right. So, I mean, essentially, Odyssey, Odysseus's story is a hero's story. So we pretty much follow the trajectory of the hero. I often think it's meaningful not only for criminalized youth, but also for any youth to really see their life in heroic terms, or anybody for that matter. It's just that I
Mm,
happen to be, for some reason, within my genetic code or karma, I'm much more interested right now in young people who I see as clearly the future, but also there's so much potential. Um, and I find that very inviting. Um, yes, so following that path of the hero, and employing as many arts as we want and they want, it's about starting from a journey, a place, as any heroic journey does, of trouble. So we do start in a place of what went wrong, and you can do that through a map. You can actually draw the map of how that happened, how you got to this point in your life, or you can do it through a story. And I like to open up the medium. So essentially, story could fall into the category of rap, poem, narrative, song. So it has a lot of possibility and a lot of entries as far as how people want to interact with that prompt. Um, and then from there, we just essentially look at all of the elements and the themes as well as the events. Not every single one. The Odyssey is huge, but
mm,
some of the events
hmm,
within Homer's epic, and then within each one, we look for an intersection between the participant, the actor, participant, and the writing, so that it could be, again, as you just said, it could be a drawing, it could be a rap, it could be a story, it could be a dance. With Cersei, for example, it became a dance. One of the things that I like to do is to re-envision as well as to contest history and how
mm,
people live in kind of a place of normal, sort of a normal or but stereotypical sort of space. So Cersei is the witch, but what happens if she's not just the witch or isn't even the witch? How did she get there? And who's calling her the witch? So again, we look at patriarchal established norms and how that's placed on this particular character, this
mm,
wise woman. And with a lot of the stories, I think they are based ideally in the cues of the youth. So if somebody says, "I don't want to do this," or "I want to do it this way," or I envision this in such a way that I want to dance it, or I want to draw it, or I actually don't want to be on stage right now, but I'll do it as a voiceover or whatever. I think that's the agency that I'm seeking to permit, of course. I mean, basically to give space to
mm,
people so they can
mm.
take charge and take control of their creative process.
I wonder if there's a moment you can think back on of a particular intersection between the Odyssey storytelling and the life story of one of the participants in the project, and sort of a moment of that was like, oh, this is really coming together in a powerful way.
Well, I mean, that usually happens throughout because in acting, we call it personalization, but you're basically personalizing the story. So it becomes your own. And so, I mean, one of the things that I think is quite poignant, and also not just in a sentimental way, but it means something to the participants, is when they write letters to people who have helped them.
Mm,
And that parallels Odysseus talking to Calypso, who basically sheltered him before it's time for him to go on with his journey, getting back to Ithaca. And usually those tributes are directed to loved ones as letters. And so I would say that's usually a point of discovery for the participants, or acknowledgement, where they're able to actually say, this person had meant a lot to me, in spite of everything I've done. They never left me. Their love was unconditional.
mm,
And I think that matters. Family matters, whether that family is biological or not. That sense of somebody's got your back.
mm, mm. I have a hard time imagining that this work is easy. I mean, you're coming into correctional systems, which are not set up to be theaters. What are some of the what are some of the challenges you have? What do you see your creative and the role of making something like this happen? I guess my question is, can you describe the work that you do to make this possible, and the kinds of challenges that you encounter in trying to create a theater program that is both relevant to these youth and also will work within the bounds of the correctional system? Because it's a huge challenge. I think that there are a lot of people in their hearts would like to do this kind of work, would like to feel that their work is reaching people in the way that this project is. But any time you try to do something like this, you're going to run into barriers. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's an essay.
Yeah.
We could talk a long time about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to build a bridge to an organization, which we call a prison or a detention center or a youth center. The normal routes, email, contacts, etc., phone calls, and you just have to get somebody who buys into it, who they're on the same page with you. I believe that this project aligns itself ideally with the stated mission on the website of a detention facility if they're talking
Mhm.
about rehabilitation.
How did it get started at Los Prietos? What did it take to get the thing off the ground at the very beginning?
I happened to go to a Christmas party. I met somebody who said, "Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good idea. Do you know about Los Prietos? I actually know somebody there." And that's how
Yeah.
that started. So it's
Uh-huh.
contacts, it's a phone call,
Hmm.
it's an email, and it's somebody on the other side who said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Why don't we give it a shot?"
Mm-hmm.
So that's the
Mm-hmm.
first step. And then from there, um, it's just creating a non-adversarial relationship with the people who you're working with, because
Mm-hmm.
if somebody lets you in as a visitor, and you are always a visitor or guest in a facility, then they are giving you a chance. So it's not like you want to walk in as a kind of defensive being. So
Mm-hmm.
once you start that collaboration with them and you're inclusive of their voices and their rules and their regulations, and all of the things that are important, that you're checking off their boxes as well, then it starts to happen, and it's mostly working within their formality. uh, and do we sometimes do things, or do the youth actually voice things which might be challenging or questioning that establishment? Probably,
Mm-hmm.
yes, but it's still within the context of that organizational detention sort of setup. And I do
Yeah,
think that
well,
there's a
you're
lot of
you're you're
questions.
talking you're talking about this like a theater person would. You are understanding the context. You are understanding the bounds. I mean, a theater person understands that the stage is a place that you can set up a frame in which things can be possible and understandable, and a way of speaking and being physically that we aren't normally that aren't normally acceptable in the ordinary world. A theater person understands the work of a theater person is to put themselves into someone else's shoes. So that the way that you're talking about sort of understanding where the people who literally hold the keys of these correctional facilities, what their requirements are, what they need to be doing. So in first on first glance, that might be like, really, a theater program and a correctional, that seems like a really difficult fit. Like, I don't know how that worked out, but in many ways it seems like your work really gave you exactly the mindset you need to be able to do this kind of work.
It's challenging. I mean, I don't want to underplay it. I mean, you can walk into a prison. Not everybody is 100% in agreement that you should be there.
Hmm.
There's a lot of controversy about doing this kind of stuff in prison. Is it like entertainment
Hmm.
for the prisoners? Is it something where they're getting good things when they should be punished? Is it like useless because they're still in prison? So, what difference does it make what you're doing with them. So, I mean, then is this even damaging to people who are in prison? Because essentially you're giving them something, a moment or a taste of that they can't really have, they can't really realize beyond that moment. Is that fair? Is that just?
Mm.
So, it's a tightrope.
They can't realize it because they still have years left at the correctional facility, or
Not
what do
only
you mean by
that,
that?
when they get out of the correctional facility, and again, they may not have years, they may just have a year. Often
Mm.
at Los Prietos, they're young men, so they're not dealing yet with long prison sentences. But even then, they go back to a neighborhood where everything's in place that got them into trouble. And,
Mm.
some of it is personal responsibility, but a lot of it is systemic. And I think it's both. It's the community and the individual who have to do a concerted effort. And, there's all kinds of arguments around this. I mean, this is a very sort of ripe subject,
Yeah.
criminal
And
justice.
how do you, so I'll ask you that question then. How do you respond to challenges like that of this is not that you're providing somebody a taste of something that's going to turn bitter in their mouth because they don't actually have access to it.
Yeah, it was a very first thing that occurred in my mind right after I did the first
Mm.
incarnation of the Odyssey Project. It was like, wait a minute, what did I just do? And I took them
Mm.
to the mountaintop, and then I said goodbye. You know?
Mm.
So part of what I've done, and I don't think it's necessarily effective, quite frankly, is I try to make connections to people outside who had more like social services, who could connect the youth beyond the project. um, so I work with them as well. People who can find jobs, people who are specifically actively
Mm.
dealing with making sure they get education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. A lot of that stuff doesn't work either. So this isn't an easy, we're dealing with a massively ingrained system in this country, which has been there for years and years and years, and it's getting worse. So I've always been very, very humble. Lots of disclaimers around this project. It's a drop in the bucket, and so
Mm.
I can't really completely satisfactorily answer that question. But I try to walk as ethically as I can. I try to listen to as many people as I can. I try to listen to the youth and the participants. I I say to them, I invite them here. What do you want to do? This is a space and a time for you. And so that's the
Mm.
best I can do at this point. But I'm learning. I need to learn more.
Hmm. This is such a ripe topic of, I mean, I guess the way I'd phrase it is like, what's the point? I mean, like you described the work as a drop in the bucket, and I want to come back around to it because it seems like such a rich topic of inquiry. But there are a couple of questions I want to make sure to pass on to you from some of the folks walking in. So I have a question here from Olga. Michael, on the topic of the many difficulties of doing the work that you do, could you speak briefly about the added challenges brought forth by the pandemic in your new project, the Trojan Women Project, which it also gives us a chance to talk about the latest project, the Trojan Women Project that you've been working on with it's a women's correction facility, correct?
Well, actually, it was the Ventura Youth Correctional Facility. They
Okay.
actually are co-ed, even
Okay.
though, of course, they segregate the genders. Maybe I should talk a little bit about that project. So, the
Yeah.
context. So the Trojan Women Project was, I guess, a kind of counterpart to the Odyssey. For a long time, I wanted to do a project that engaged youthful female detention facility participants, and I wanted to do it in
Is
such
the
a,
Odyssey Project all young men?
yes.
Hmm.
And if you think of the Odyssey, I mean, basically,
Right. Right. It's
I mean,
appropriate for the story.
it's really a male-driven, myth written by Homer, of course, but also you have a hero. I'm not saying that can't move fluidly into other populations, but it is constructed as a patriarchal story
Hmm.
of men who are struggling. And I also envisioned possibly doing that with women. But then I thought maybe it would be a good idea to look at another classic that really told women's stories. And so we decided on Euripides' Trojan Women. And that story is almost the opposite of the Odyssey, because I mean the Odyssey can have a kind of happy ending. I mean, basically Odysseus winds up in Ithaca. He gets back home, he reaches his objective, and then at the very end he dies, peacefully. So I think that's a happy ending. When you talk about the Trojan women, it's considered one of the bleakest, darkest tragedies ever written.
Mm.
It's right after the Trojan War. The Greeks have won. They basically kill all of the men. They also kill a lot of the children, particularly if they're male. They rape the women, and they basically captivate the women who are left. And so we hear their voices and their stories post that debacle. And it's at that point that, they're looking at their lives going forward, and how do you go forward as a slave? They're about to be basically enslaved by the Greeks. So it's a story of brutality. It's a story with absolutely there's no comic relief in it.
Mm.
So why do I use that story, of course,
Yeah.
to maybe for women to really, young women to feel that they've got a voice and they've got some power, is because my idea was to take it and to sort of shift it, to turn it on its end, so that these young women, and of course they're male students because I do it with UC students, but essentially for the female incarcerated youth, they're looking at these stories not as endings, but as beginnings. And then the idea is that they turn those stories around into, well, how would you rewrite that? And
Mm.
how do you respond to that? And what is another possible outcome? So how can you create from the ashes of Troy? They burn Troy at the end, the Greeks burn Troy. From those ashes of Troy, how can you recreate these lives in context of your own understanding of your strength or power or lack thereof? But what can you do to make a difference in this story, to change it?
Mm.
Maybe it's not a happy ending, but it's not an annihilating one. So
Mm.
that's the Trojan women.
And how did
Um,
and so how did that go? when you
with the
you know when you ask
pandemic, that
people
was
to
the
rewrite
original
those
question.
stories? Yeah.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
the pandemic. So I think with the pandemic, we were scheduled to go forward, and then the pandemic hit Ventura Youth Correctional Facility. 40 of the staff and youth were infected, and it was a no-go basically on the project.
Mm.
So we were on hold. Meanwhile, I was on a schedule, of course, with the university, which is saying, well, the class starts now, and you got UC students involved, so they have to start now. So that's what we
So you
did.
have you have two institutions who are not who are saying different things.
Yeah, I mean, well, we had to obviously start the class, but
Yeah.
so we started it, and I would just say it was meant to be, if you believe that, or fortune, or whatever. But after 1 week, I got the word from the coordinator at Ventura saying, we can start. I can
Mm.
give you 3 student participants, and they're interested. They want to do this, and so
Mm.
we did it with those 3 young women, and we did it basically because they couldn't do it in class time, the scheduled time. We basically created another project within this project, which was focused on the stories of these young women. And the way we did it is, as we did it with the other UC students, is we basically showed them a PowerPoint of the Trojan women. I didn't expect everybody to read it. And then asked them, what they thought, how they intersected with it, and a lot of writing prompts. And then we created stories. Everybody did these digital stories. I don't know if you're familiar with digital storytelling, but everybody
I
created.
mean, it depends on what you mean by it. Like videos online, YouTube recording.
These are really short, like 3 to maybe 5 minute stories. They're personal stories,
Mm.
and the narration comes from the person who is telling the story, and is a very specific format that it follows. We worked with the Story Center in Berkeley, so that we had a master facilitator who is loved us to bring. I think we had a total with the UC students and the incarcerated youth. We had, I believe, 17 digital stories. And
Mm.
the class was only 3 weeks, 2 weeks for the incarcerated youth. So it was magic, and we
Wow.
just jammed, and
Mm.
it
Mm.
was a wonderful, I think,
So it came together.
say it again.
So it came together.
It did come together.
That's amazing. Are these are these stories available online for people to see yet?
No, I think so there's issues around that. This is with one of the ethical issues. Basically,
Mm.
these stories belong to the authors.
Mm-hmm.
And with the incarcerated women, there's actually some legalities around showing them online. Like it would be dangerous and perhaps not safe to expose
Mm,
their stories. And, some of them even have their faces in it. So that's
mm,
not going to happen. If they get out and they want to do that, they have the agency to do that. But what I can do
right.
is I usually can share some of these videos with interested people under lock and key with a passcode, basically.
Mm, mm. Great, great. We had a question come in asking, how is it different? Is it different working primarily with men and boys in the Odyssey Project and women, girls, and Trojan women?
Um, Not different to me,
Hmm,
to me
hmm,
so much. I mean, there's a different energetic, I suppose, to some extent, but I don't treat people differently. I basically, I learned this from one of my great teachers who said, teach what's in front of you.
hmm,
So I just basically, whatever they bring, it's like, okay, let's play, let's work. The stories, as I said, are very different, but the actual individuals I find are also different as unique persons, but not as sort of like classifications of boys and girls. I mean, yeah, I understand that exists, but
hmm.
I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense to me. It seems like such a uh, is this just a, a a sly question to ask? It seems kind of, it doesn't seem classically American to say we're gonna do this project that is about tragedy, and it does not have any optimism to it. Like it seems kind of countercultural to do Trojan women in the way that you have. It seems to provide, it seems to be something of a wisdom from another era of the importance of mourning, of the importance of looking at tragedy square in the face. Did you find that the participants or yourself reacted to it and thought of it in that way as something that was like refreshing or helpful?
Yeah, I mean, we immersed ourselves in the story as it was written by Euripides. So
Mm,
right from the beginning, I mean, there was a strong dose of tragedy because they were absorbing that story, but they were also discussing it and interacting with it in such a way where they could look at each character and in really personal and individual ways.
mm,
um, and these were really everybody. I can't name a person in this class who wasn't bright. They were all like alert and bright and living in the current world as well as the world of that play. So they absorbed the tragedy. They got it. But I think, again, to recreate that tragedy, if I just went into, well, what are the sad stories of your life as women, for example, and left it there, I have no idea, other than it maybe if I had a therapist on board being, sort of a healing moment for them in some way or therapeutic effect.
mm,
I'm not sure how that moves the dialogue forward. And I'm not sure how that connects with where they are in their lives, where they need, I think most people need. I don't mean this from a place of elitism, like they need this and I need something else, but I think we generally want to find out what can we do to make our lives, stronger, better, more
mm,
powerful, so I can fulfill myself. And so I saw that tragedy not as an end, as it does in the traditional theater. It ends, and we feel bad as an audience, and we think, oh my God, Hecuba, poor woman, And then we go to a restaurant, we have a nice meal, and we think, oh, I'm glad I'm not Hecuba. So, but I think what's really useful about applied theater is you're applying it. So you're looking at these stories, or any story in this context, in a way that is applicable to your own life, in a way that you can use it, and you can use it for your own purposes. And
mm,
generally, I think if you're, or at least in this particular case, I can't speak generally, supposedly, but specifically in this group, I think everybody had a positive agenda for their lives. They want their lives to feel good. They had dreams, they had hopes, they wanted to fulfill those. So how do they absorb this story in such a way that it supports where they're going in their lives?
Mm-hmm. So I wanna come back to this question that I guess I'll just phrase as why do this? And one of the ways of saying that, to be saying it in a different way than I already have, is, you're a professor at UCSB. You have, I presume, steady life. It seems like it would be easy to just say, yeah, I'm going to show up and I'm going to teach my students the voice instruction and the classic theater that I'm based in. It seems like that would be a lot easier than doing the work that you're doing in the correctional facility, and having these doubts about, whether you're, feeling like your work is just a drop in the bucket. So why do it? Why do you, what keeps you doing it?
Well, yes, I have a job, which is nice, and I'm not knocking that I have a job, but there's challenge in my work as a voice teacher as well. I mean, the thing is, I started off, and to some extent still am, although I haven't done it very, very recently, but I'm an actor. So the idea is that I teach and I act to grow. And if I'm teaching to grow. So I love teaching, but it becomes really stale unless I challenge myself.
Mm.
Um, so I'm fortunate that I have beautiful, just wonderful students at UCSB. I mean, the BFA students and the applied theater students are just extraordinary. And so again, it's like teach what's in front of you. So I have to always alter my agenda to what's going to serve them. And that's an ongoing process. And I think that's why teaching, you can become like really, really old and still teach, because I think that works for a long time. That is a regenerative process, but you got to challenge yourself. If you just slide back into, well, I got my lesson plan and let me just walk into class. Now, I have to be honest, I think sometimes that's how one is viewed in institutions. It's like, well, you have been teaching this forever, so you don't really have to prepare it or anything. And therefore, sometimes you are judged on that, and not often favorably. But I don't teach that way. That's not me. I don't fit into these, like boxes too well. So there's that. And I do think that unless I constantly challenge myself as a voice teacher, that's part of where this project came from, by the way. Then I might as well stop and do something else. As far as why I do this particular kind of work, it's because it's who I am in this world. It's who I am. I would be somebody else if things had gone differently in my life, I suppose. But right now, not even right now. I mean, I think this is my essence. I think it's part of my essence. I don't think it's my entirety. I still love acting. I love conservatory style teaching. I'm finding also that I've been writing some, so I love that too. But my heart and soul really lives in theater, and it lives in breaking ground, and it lives in the heat and the thick of it. If there's a trouble, if there's a problem, and we can create something that brings people to an awakening or an enlightenment or even a movement towards what they want, I am totally passionate about that. And to pull as many artistic skills as you have in support of that, to me is so fulfilling. So that's why I do it. I do it, therefore, to some extent, for selfish reasons. I'm not all that altruistic. I love doing
Well,
this.
no, I mean, I'm actually, I had a feeling you might say something like that. And the reason why I had a feeling you might say something like that is I asked Sharon Main the same question basically last week. We were talking to Sharon Main about her work in the environment and all the work that she did in the community. And I can't remember exactly what I asked, but I asked some question about why she does it. And she basically said the same thing of just like, I don't know another way to be. Like, this is just who I am. Which really seems to be, I mean, I think that's the only reason to do anything. It seems to be the thing, like I said in the introduction to this, and in the announcement that we sent out, we have a little bit of a sub theme going here of like people who do hard things. I basically, I kind of always ask the question like, why are you doing this thing that seems so hard? And I basically always get the same answer back, which is because I have to. I don't,
And
and yeah.
I also have to say, Casey, it really is hard in the sense that because I'm doing this on top of everything else, and
Mm-hmm.
um, which is challenging to balance everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've evolved, and I have to live in my evolution. I can't live with what is only required of me, And then I have to say that it's a lot harder to not do this.
Hmm.
And, I feel very, very fortunate in that I get to do, even though I have to struggle sometimes.
Why would it be harder not to do it?
Well, because then I would not be living my life, would I? I mean, I wouldn't be
Hmm.
fulfilling myself. Um, I feel fortunate that, for example, and I'm not knocking anybody's job, but I don't work as a administrator. That's not really appealing to me. It's, and I'm not knocking it because I think that can be very appealing if you're really good at that. But
Hmm.
I have to say, or whatever else, apparently I don't also work as a CEO. Maybe that would be appealing to me. I have to think about that. But for some reason, I didn't get those cards. So I feel I'm doing the best with the cards that I've been dealt in this life.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that, this work is hard. I imagine that there's some degree of what might be called suffering that goes along with it. But you'd be suffering either way. If you didn't do it, in some ways, it sounds like what you're saying, it'd be worse.
I think the only suffering I experience, honestly, is when I learn about the tragedies that
Mm,
befall the people that I work with. So that's very sad and that's very painful.
mm,
Um, I care about them, of course, because I've worked with them, and even if it's only for a short period of time, you get to know people and you really share and trust a lot between yourselves in that short period. So if I catch up with somebody or hear about somebody who has gone deeper and deeper and deeper into a difficult situation, or the criminal justice system has sort of like they're moving further along that ladder, that downward ladder. I have to say that's painful. That's
mm,
painful. And the whole thing of suffering for your art. I mean, if you love it, I don't really call it suffering. To me, it's suffering if you're not doing it. It's suffering
mm,
if it's better to like struggle and get somewhere near to what you want than to just give it up. And to me, that's suffering.
mm,
All of those
mm.
Russian plays are about those people who don't get to do what they want.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a whole genre of literature.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how you're talking and what you're saying reminds me of an interview that I heard once with Jean Vanier, who started the L'Arche Institute or L'Arche Movement or something like that. It's a live-in, a series of live-in houses in Canada and the U.S. and I think elsewhere, where people who have physical and mental challenges live with folks who don't, and they just live side by side. And when the interviewer asked him why he started this, he described it in terms of that it was pleasurable. That he said, I love this. I love these people. I'm not doing it out of a sense of obligation or out of a sense of that it's hard, and so I'm doing it to myself because it's hard. He talked about I think I'm probably going to get this wrong because I'm not educated enough, but I think it's one of Aristotle's texts or one of Aristotle's theories of ethics, that it's essentially sort of the what is most ethical is also what is most pleasurable. And when you really listen to what is deep down, long term, not short term, what is most pleasurable to you, it will often lead you in these directions that people wouldn't look at that and think that you're doing it. It doesn't seem necessarily like you know a, that it's fun every day, but it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is, my heart opens
Mm,
when I do this work. Even when I was listening to you talking about that project of able-bodied and disabled living together, my heart opened. I mean, I love that. Something about that part of humanity, that sense of cooperation, that sense of tolerance and acceptance, it just feels like it gives me, it keeps me very heart-centered. It keeps me very open and breathing and alive. And a lot of the other stuff, quite frankly, that I'm surrounded with doesn't.
mm-hmm,
A lot of what's happening, not only in the
mm-hmm,
world, but just going out into the street sometimes is, you're dealing with a mindset which is harsh. So
mm.
I think
How do
theater
you
is always a place
deal?
where you can create that.
Yeah. How do you deal with the difference between thinking about what's right in front of you and what's thinking of what is all around you? I mean, you are dealing with the correctional system, which is huge and involves many thousands of people and institutions all across the country. And I imagine that you think about that because you care. And I've seen in your work trying to find ways to create a program that will iterate and be a model and can spread and work in a variety of ways. But you're also saying in this interview that you teach what's right in front of you, and so there's very much a sense of like the person that is here one at a time, the work that I have to do. Do you experience it in the way that I'm describing it as kind of these two things and sort of a dilemma to sort of switch between these two mindsets?
Are you talking about, let me clarify your question, the mindset of the institution that surrounds the individual and then the individual, or?
No, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not phrasing this more carefully. I'm talking about your mindset, the way that you think about your work. Is it a challenge? Do you experience it as a challenge to think about, okay, I'm dealing with this person right now, but there's also this whole massive system. And so how do I make some kind of a difference in that system? Do you experience it as a dichotomy, as a challenge? Or is it because the thing that you've also said is what you know how to do is just teach the person in front of you, so maybe you don't think in that way.
Well, I do think that the linchpin of those things coming together is the person in front of you. So if
Mm,
in fact there's an effective connection that has the possibility of traveling beyond that connection for both of us, actually, but also specifically if this can produce any kind of favorable result, and I'm not just talking about, like quantitative studies, et cetera, but favorable result in terms of quality of life for that individual, then to me, that incorporates my understanding of what they're living in, the system.
mm,
Um, I mean, there are many mindsets that you have to go through in terms of creating any kind of project where you're interfacing with organizations that have to do with, in fact, I did become an administrator, even though I said I didn't want to do that. But, you become those things, but you become those things out of necessity, which is different than I need to have a job, I need to make money. So I guess, I'll call people on the telephone and see if I can sell them encyclopedias or whatever. Um, when you're on a mission, as it were, or when you're really connected to the cause, then being an administrator, being a fundraiser, being a producer, being whatever you have to be is easier, I find. Things which I actually had a hard time doing for myself as an actor. I was like, I wanted an
mm,
agent to do all that, right? But,
mm.
I don't, with this, I don't have anybody but myself to do it. And so I've learned it. It's not always the most pleasant part of the work, but it's necessary.
I resonate with that very strongly. That sense of, I think that you have to find the thing that you can't help working hard on is maybe the best way I can think of it. Because, I remember, I've done different things professionally, and there were definitely, I was a theater major too. So I felt this sort of work of being a professional actor and all the things that you are supposed to do. And I didn't want to do it. I gave myself a really hard time for it. And then I found other ways of applying that knowledge that all of a sudden I couldn't stop working on. And it really motivated, it was the same kind of, tedious tasks of fundraising and pitching and telling people about the work. But you have to find that, the particular thing that you just can't help focusing on. And it's not simply a matter of giving yourself a hard time for not working hard enough. Maybe you just haven't found the thing that you can work hard on.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think you have to feel like you're going to make a difference, even if you may not. You just have to believe that you might make a difference, even in one person's life.
Mm. Mm.
And it's, I find those are cliches, so I have to be very careful about them. I think what I can do, I love the word facilitation only because I have nothing to give except space. Once you give the space and you, again, listen to what the person wants, then it's a matter of just facilitating a process for them. I'm not saying that doesn't take some skill, but at the same time, they do all the real work. And I think that's as it should be, because otherwise it becomes like you're giving people things that they haven't figured out for themselves, perhaps, if they really want them, or if they really want them, how to get them. And so, I just believe it's important to be humble and step back when you're working with any student, and that includes conservatory students as well as anybody else.
Mm. Mm. What you just said about giving space reminds me of a quote from Anne Bogart, who you may have heard it before, that I may have quoted it in a previous episode before, because I think of it a lot. She said, I think it's the only gift that we can give to a situation is the force of our attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listening is key. You've got to you want to listen. How can you proceed without?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're making lots of assumptions without listening.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine going anywhere better than we've already been. And we're about at the end of an hour here. Is there anything that you have coming up, or anything that you want to make sure that people know about, that we can direct people towards? I can post links to this when it's done, if there's anything like that.
Well, I have this wonderful person that I'm working with. She's a teaching assistant, but she's just terrific, Olga Fakani. And she and I are working to promote the Trojan Women Project. So we have a conference coming up with the classical, I believe it's the classical conferences. I'm not going to get this right, but anyway, a classical society. And I can give you that link if you'd like to join us there. And then other than that, the film that I've been working on now for 6 years is still in process. It's the Odyssey Project. It started in 2014. And that basically started with a small cohort of youth. And we've tracked them through these years, which was not my original intention. I thought I'd make a film. I've never done this, but I'll make a film. It'll be fast and dirty. And that's it. Well, boy, did I grow and learn a lot there. So it's still in process. However, we are approaching the end of it. I really believe it this time.
So you've been tracking some of the participants who were part of the Odyssey Project, I imagine, in 2013 or 2014 as they move on. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So for the last 6 years, we've been basically looking at their stories and what's happened to them. Some of them are incarcerated, some of them not, and we're still trying to get the last couple of interviews. And then hopefully, if the world is open to us, we'll distribute that film. And that's the part I don't like, because I'm not in charge of that completely, but we will need a distributor. And then, so that's hopefully coming up. I also wrote a manual on the Odyssey Project, which I would love to get published. And so Of course, that requires a publisher too. So,
Great. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's pretty
Thanks for
much,
spreading that out there. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Good.
pretty much what I have going on right now.
Great. Well, Michael, thank you so much.
You're
This,
welcome.
this has been wonderful.
Well, thank you too.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you, Michael. I'm signing off now.
All right, take care.
Good night.